Welcome to Financial Discretion Advised. I'm Tyler Hafford. Today we're going to be talking about something that is kind of near and dear to Mainers' hearts, especially if you've been a teacher or worked in the government for the state of Maine. We're going to talk about the Maine PERS benefit, so the defined benefit for employees of the state. And I brought in another one of the advisors here at Penobscot Financial Advisors, Craig Joncas, for a repeat performance on Financial Discretion Advised. And Craig has recently wrote a blog on Maine PERS and how that impacts Social Security. And I think this is a really good discussion that a lot of people have questions on. I run into it quite a bit in my planning work, assuming Craig does as well. But Craig, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. Happy to be back here after a long hiatus.
Yeah. Craig and I are both very excited about the golf season this year. We typically have a bet on our handicaps. And I believe we are one and one.
1-1. Feeling good about this year, though. I'm starting up here. There's only one direction to go.
So we'll definitely keep everyone posted on how that turns out, but I'll probably end up owning a drink. All right, Craig, let's talk Maine PERS. Why don't you kind of start with what is this benefit?
Yeah, good question. So Maine PERS is what's called a defined benefit pension plan. So what that means is that if you work for the state of Maine as like a teacher or a state employee or a judge or something like that, that's covered by state employment and this defined benefit pension, you contribute a little bit out of every paycheck into this pension plan. And the state actually invests the funds on your behalf for you. You have kind of no control or choice over how that contribution is invested for you over your lifetime. But what the state does give you is they define that benefit that you get out of it later in life. So they say if you put in X amount of years and we take a multiple of your salary, we're going to give you this fixed pension after you retire for the rest of your life. So unlike maybe like a traditional 401k plan, which we call a defined contribution plan, where the only thing that's defined is what you put in, and you have kind of your own investment, successes or failures, and what you get out of it later is undefined.
Right.
These types of plans, they're defined benefit. What you get out of it later is fixed, guaranteed, and the investment controls kind of on the state here.
And I'm assuming that there's a calculation method to what that benefit looks like. You want to talk a little bit about how that is calculated?
Yeah, sure. So the standard formula for Maine PERS is basically just taking your years of service as an employee, multiplying that by 0.02 or 2%, and then multiplying that again by the average of your top 3 years of compensation while you were employed by the state. So just final average compensation, 0.02 years of service. And that gets you what we call kind of your full retirement benefit under Maine PERS. And then they give you like 8 options that you can select from that involve a reduced pension amount, but some form of a benefit for a survivor. But generally, we're just using that base formula to get a rough estimate.
And so that calculation's really going to favor you if you put quite a bit of time into the system, right? If you're paying into this for a full career, you are more apt to benefit from this.
Absolutely. Yeah. The longer you spend in the career, the better you do. Just as an example, the years of service times that 0.02 factor, or 2%, means if somebody spends a full career, let's say 40 years in a state covered position, that means 40 times 0.02, that's 80% of their pre-retirement salary is their pension benefit that lasts for as long as they live in retirement. That's a pretty huge replacement. Even at 30 years, we're talking 60%, right? So yeah, the more you kind of compound those years, the better, this benefit does for us.
Yeah. And it kind of replaces Social Security, right? For these folks. So maybe,
Absolutely.
why don't you kind of dive into how does Social Security and Maine PERS coincide with each other?
Yeah. So in the state of Maine, if you are contributing to Maine PERS, at least for most people, you are not also contributing to Social Security. So here in Maine, yes, your Maine PERS is like a Social Security replacement. Now, I'd argue it's, an improvement as well. It's an enhanced program. Social Security, on average, I think replaces somewhere like around 40 or so percent of a retiree's, salary in retirement. We already went through an example of how good a Maine PERS benefit will be. So the Maine PERS benefit can definitely be greater. However, I think that kind of the hot topic in Maine as it relates to Social Security is the fact that if you had prior Social Security credits and earnings, those benefits may be reduced because you're earning a Maine PERS pension.
Government's trying to kind of protect folks from double dipping into both these programs, right?
That's right. Yeah. And I think definitely there's kind of some misunderstanding as to why it happens this way and why there is that reduction. Kind of going back in history, what was occurring and what Social Security was trying to tighten up is Social Security uses a 35-year earning history when they calculate your benefit under Social Security. And they average those 35 years. So what could happen is a really high income earner could work only a handful of years under Social Security, but drive up kind of a pretty nice average compensation still, even with all those other zeros, because their high years were so big.
Right.
And Social Security pays you a higher percentage of your 35-year average if you are a low wage earner than if you are a high wage earner. So somebody could go into Social Security, earn really high wages for a handful of years, make it look like they were just a really low income earner for very many years, get a nice high replacement ratio, go into Maine PERS, get a nice pension there because they only use your top 3 years, and kind of double dip in both systems. So this was meant to prevent a high income earner from kind of gaming the Social Security charts and how they pay lower income people a higher ratio.
And there's a couple different ways that they're going to determine how much your Social Security is reduced. And we'll get into that in just a second. Wanted to just talk about two big differences between the Maine PERS system and the Social Security. And you've kind of alluded to a couple of them, but Social Security, you're going to hit a cap, right? This is as much as you can receive in Social Security. Not necessarily the case in the Maine PERS system.
That's correct. Yeah. Social Security is a cap, both on, what you pay into the system. They don't tax any earnings above a certain threshold. And then there's also a cap on your benefit, but Maine PERS, not the case, whatever that salary is, type 102 with 20 years of service.
And I guess this one would be a bit of a drawback, but Social Security can make adjustments for inflation, as can the Maine PERS system. Maine PERS has other restrictions on how much that inflation can be adjusted compared to Social Security. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So generally, Social Security, you can expect it to go up with, general cost of living, gets a COLA adjustment every year. Maine PERS does have a cap on that COLA. And honestly, I can never remember the specifics of how they define it. But, when we're planning for clients, we're usually expecting that Maine PERS COLA is going to be something that's like half of the Social Security COLA or maybe even less.
Yeah. And, traditionally with inflation, that's worked out just fine for folks on the Maine PERS system. You get some abnormal conditions like we've seen over the past couple of years where Social Security saw a larger kind of bump up. But typically if inflation's hanging around that 2.5%, the Maine PERS system is going to keep up for you.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's dive into the government pension offset and the windfall elimination provision, because those are the two ways that they can offset your Social Security benefits.
Sure.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. So WEP, windfall elimination provision, and GPO, government pension offset. So WEP is the one we probably deal with most often, just because GPO tends to have kind of the same result for everybody and very rarely see much different. But a windfall elimination provision is the reduction that applies to your own benefits that you might be eligible for under Social Security. And essentially what it's saying, if you work a job where you did not contribute to Social Security, and then later receive a pension from that job and that work, the WEP is going to apply to you. So every time in Maine, it applies to you, because when you work in Maine, you do not contribute to Social Security, and then you get that pension.
Yep.
Some interesting things to know about that reduction. Number one is the reduction is never greater than 50%. So WEP can only ever reduce your benefits by half. If you don't feel like learning anything more and you just want to plan conservatively for what might happen to your Social Security, just take whatever estimate they're giving you, cut it in half, and that's a good starting point. But it could be reduced by less than half. How you achieve a reduction that's less than 50% is by accumulating years of substantial earnings under Social Security. And that word kind of sounds scary, substantial earnings.
Right.
People think they need to make 100 grand a year or something like that, but it's not. I believe this year in 2024, that earnings level is somewhere in the low to mid $20,000 mark.
Right.
So a lot of people could be working a half-time job and still knocking out their substantial earning check mark.
Yep.
So if you collect 20 years or more of substantial earnings under Social Security while you were working under Social Security, that 50% reduction starts to come down. Once you're at 30 years of substantial earnings under Social Security, a WEP reduction no longer applies at all. So yeah, greatest reduction possible, 50%, could be less depending on your years.
Yep. And so really, you can do these calculations online. They have calculators that help you out, right?
Yep.
Certainly we're doing it with clients. What do you think the best method is? Do you think it is kind of expect half if you get more for folks that are just kind of doing it themselves?
Yeah, usually the people that are facing a WEP, I find, probably have a small Social Security anyways.
Yeah.
Because they spent a career not contributing to Social Security. They probably have a big Maine PERS pension. Whatever Social Security they collect is going to be small.
Yeah.
So cutting in half, a good, fair, conservative estimate, especially where it's not going to be a major source of income for them.
Yeah.
If you're in a position where your Social Security benefit is pretty substantial, you feel like you're relying heavily on that Social Security benefit to get through retirement, or your retirement outlook is kind of tight or not so rosy,
Yeah.
might make sense to sharpen the pencil, get involved with the calculators, talk with an advisor, or try to figure out more specifically what you can expect.
Yep. And I think that makes sense. And then the other way that this can affect you is the government pension offset, right?
Exactly.
Benefits to a spouse and how that interacts with these two different essentially pension programs.
Right. Yeah, so GPO is the other reduction that can apply to you. So GPO applies to any Social Security benefits you may be eligible to as a spouse. And so how Social Security works is when you apply for Social Security, you are eligible for your own benefit amount or 50% of your spouse's benefit amount, whatever is greater.
Yeah.
So you can imagine for a lot of teachers, they might have a spouse who worked in Social Security forever, has a pretty large Social Security benefit. The teacher may have a pretty small Social Security benefit. So under normal rules, they would be eligible for half of their spouses instead of their own.
Yeah.
However, this GPO comes in and kind of takes care of that. So how GPO works is they take 2/3, 66% of your pension that you will be earning from Maine PERS. And they use that 2/3 to reduce your benefits as a spouse. So if your spousal Social Security benefit was going to be, say, $1,000 a month, but you've got a Maine PERS pension earning you $3,000 a month, they're going to take 2/3 of that $3,000 a month, $2,000, and they're going to use that to reduce the $1,000 you would have been otherwise eligible for under Social Security, and it's going to go to zero. In my career of doing plenty of WEP and GPO, estimates, I find that GPO almost always goes to zero. Just that one is a little bit more of a harsh penalty than WEP.
Which has been my experience as well. All right, well, let's talk about a situation that I bump into quite a bit. And this isn't kind of recommendations, because I don't want to give anyone recommendations without knowing their financial plan, but occasionally I'll run into someone who has put in a couple of years in the retirement system for Maine, is now contributing to Social Security, and wondering what are the options that they have for the money that's still in the Maine retirement system. And just want to get your thoughts, what can they do? There's a few options that they have.
Sure. Yeah. So if somebody only has a couple of years in the system, they've got the option of leaving those years there and leaving the money in the system. And then in the future, if they go back to work under that system, they might continue to accumulate years and continue to accumulate that benefit that could be powerful for them. So they might consider keeping it there if they are going to consider returning to the system at some point in time. So if you're young in your career, uncertain in where you're headed, it might be best just to leave it there for a while. If you're later in your career and you're pretty certain you're not going back to teaching, or you just don't even have enough years left in your career where it would even be all that worthwhile, you also can roll over the contributions that you made into that system, plus the interest that had been earned over the years, into a traditional IRA. And when you do that, you're effectively kind of forfeiting the defined contribution benefit and the employer matching contributions that had gone in. But in return for that, these WEP and GPO reductions are not going to apply. So often, if we have somebody with only a small amount of years with a large Social Security benefit that isn't, otherwise getting rid of WEP through years of substantial earnings, it could make sense that they just roll the money out, get it in an IRA, little forfeit on the employer match, but better than maybe what the forfeit could have been had WEP or GPO applied.
And if anyone's good at doing time value of money calculations, you can kind of take that lump sum and do out some math to see if I made some average returns, would it be more beneficial or not? But you have a little flexibility. The last thing I want to come back to, Craig, you mentioned this, but I don't want it to get lost for folks. You do have a little bit more flexibility on the payout options from Maine PERS than you do Social Security, right? And I think you'd mentioned it. You can kind of do a single life, you can do a joint life, you can do 10-year certain. It almost behaves more like an annuity in that respect than something like Social Security.
That's right. Yeah. So 8 different options from the Maine PERS system. Some of those options are single life with some guarantee periods. Some of those options are leaving kind of like a percentage of the benefit behind to your spouse or joint annuitant. Some of them are kind of full life where it survives for as long as you do and your spouse. So you'll get several options and get to kind of structure that, like you called it, an annuity. That's really what it is at the end of the day. However, best suits your needs.
And I think that's kind of the full circle back to just the planning work, knowing what your plan needs, right? Can you just take it for your life? Do you need some remaining benefit for a spouse, and kind of going through what your expectations in retirement are. And I think that's important with everything that we do, but certainly with making that decision.
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts on Maine PERS for folks out there?
I think just spend the time to think about it. Don't wait until you're knocking on retirement's door. Figure this stuff out in advance. You might hear a lot from your coworkers that might not be accurate information. So try to kind of sift through the noise and, get a clear picture of what's going on with this and how it impacts you.
Yep. I think that's great advice. I always get the folks that are very scared about the WEP provisions. I would just say, do your homework, do some calculations, and see what that is. It's not the doomsday scenario that some folks might be sharing with you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that wraps up Maine PERS and Social Security. If anyone has questions, put them in the comments below. Interested to hear, what people are thinking or questions that are popping up for people that are involved in this system. Subscribe, and share our podcast. Craig, we out.
All right. Yeah.
See you guys.
Bye.
The foregoing content reflects the opinions of Penobscot Financial Advisors and is subject to change at any time without notice. Content provided herein is for informational purposes only and should not be used or construed as investment advice or a recommendation regarding the purchase or sale of any security. There is no guarantee that the statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Thank you.